Hi and welcome to this video. You may hear the saying, don't get comfortable at your job. So let's cover what's meant by this. Now the key word here is stagnation. And what we mean by this is you're not learning anything new and you're doing the same thing over and over again. Now you're not progressing, but you're not going backwards. And it's not a great place to be because as we know, tech changes so fast and roughly every 5 years, it kind of moves in a cycle. So something new will come out and that'll become the new norm. It looks like at the moment, DevOps is where that's going to be. Now, I believe we're at that peak of that new wave or that new cycle. I just believe we're at the end of it. It could be longer, it could be less. But the key point we're trying to drive here is what you don't want to do is end up stagnant, doing the same thing over and over again. One of my old managers had a brilliant story about this. And, I kind of took this to heart because I also got quite annoyed at him at the same time. So I was working as a system administrator. But somehow, bizarrely, I managed to start getting roped back into help desk. Just try and get more tickets done and try and help and guide and get people up to speed. Me and my colleague at the time, my friend David, said, we're here, can we not call ourselves second or third line? Or why is everyone here on the same level? Like we're qualified, we're doing higher up stuff. Politics aside, he came up and said, I don't want second or first line because what used to happen is second line spent all day imaging PCs. Now they loved it, but when layoff time came round, who were the first to go? Well, why are we paying these guys so much? Then we started looking at what they were doing. Well, all they did all day was rebuild and re-image PCs. Now, it wasn't at this job, I must disclose, it was somewhere else where the manager had worked. And you start thinking, well, people do end up in ruts like this. That's all they'll do. Like they said there, all they'll do is rebuild and re-image machines. So first line were doing all the work. They're doing the troubleshooting, the support, and it had no real path of escalation. But the second line guys, brilliant. They just sit back, cup of tea, rebuild a machine. But what happened to them later? Well, the layoffs happened, right? They got comfortable at their job. They stagnated. They weren't learning, but they weren't going backwards. They were just doing the same thing. Now you think a year or two of this might look good. You might have a job title, second line for 2 years, then go for a new job. And the word the manager used was unemployable. They had no real skills. What could they do? They could hit F1 on the keyboard or escape, whatever the command was, to start the imaging. And that was it. They'd sit there, re-image PCs all day. Probably one of the biggest things to drive from this is it doesn't mean you have to quit your job. Far from it. What can you do in there to change things up? Some people like me started consultancy, started contracting. I worked out roughly every 6 months, even shorter. I like new and fresh, right? I like throwing myself into the deep end, learning fast. That works for me. So I'm on a very short cycle. That's why consultancy and contracting work well for me. Others, they want something more stable. Consulting is great for that because it means you go around on lots of different projects. And sometimes the projects are longer. So you might spend 6 months, a year, 2 years, sometimes even 3 years on the same project. But now you're moving around, you're varied, and you're seeing different problems. And the nice thing with consultancy is you have a stable paycheck, but you can move around on different projects, which again is pretty cool, right? Now you're learning. You're not stagnating, but you're at the same company. And unfortunately, in some places, you might end up at a small company. Not a startup, I think, because they're so fast and everything's moving so rapidly, that's kind of like an edge case. You're going to learn a lot there and it's going to be really neat. But I'm talking like small business, I think what some people call it like a mum and pop store or something like that, where it's quite a small company and things are quite rigid. And you hear that famous phrase, that's the way things have always been. You might have a harder time because then you'll just end up in that continuous rut of doing the same thing. But don't let this be despairing. Now, like I said, you could quit and go, right, screw it. I'm going to go to a consultancy. I'm always going to keep my tech skills sharp, or screw it. I'm going to go to a startup. One thing you can do with small business is look at implementing new things. Keep an eye on where the trends are going in IT. I don't think there's a single forum you're probably going to find this on. I don't think YouTube videos are going to do it. Best thing I found was actually the job market. That's how I found it in my case, that DevOps was the way forward. I saw very quickly that system administrator was on the way down. DevOps is on the way up. So I realized, okay, whatever this DevOps is one, where the money's going, but secondly, where the market seems to be going. And again, we're starting to see that now. There's lots of reasons why businesses are moving to it. So start looking at what little things you can start implementing where you are. Now, probably one of the best things to start having a little go at might be something like Docker. Start introducing that. Now you're keeping your technology skills nice and sharp. Then it might be something else. You go, okay, well, Docker's gone really well and it's working nicely. Well, let's have a look at something else. Can maybe we start shifting some stuff to AWS? Or perhaps can we start looking at Kubernetes? Maybe we have it on-prem. But now the key thing is here, you're creating change. Nothing is stagnating. You're learning, you're going forward, That's where you want to be. So again, let's wrap that up. That when they say don't get comfortable at your job, the key thing here is don't stagnate. Just always make sure you're moving forward. You're learning new skills, learning new technology, and always keeping ahead of the curve. So that wraps up this video. Hope you've enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.